So we're here for this.
Hey, there it is. Yeah. I was kind of accused, my friend Mary, who I did a chat with around the time of Origin Story, kind of accused me of never talking about this album. And she's kind of right, I guess. I think just because of the nature of it, just the whole process was so long. And then by the time it actually came out, Dolour was essentially no more.
Yeah.
So it never really had its moment the way the other albums had, not only with listeners of Dolour, but with me too. It just kind of like the moment came and went, and I had already like put out a Traveling Mercies album, and so I'm trying to correct that and celebrate it for for all that it is in time for its 15th anniversary. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So what do you want to cover in particular, or you just kind of want to?
The timeline of it is so weird. I mean, it's so appropriately called The Years in the Wilderness because it kind of like fills in the cracks of like a 4-year period, with the greatest irony being the whole premise of it and the whole production approach was like, let's record an album in one day,
Oh, that turned to 4 years.
Yeah. And then it's like, nearly 4 years later, it finally ends up coming out after Dolour is essentially done.
As you know, I'm a notorious nerd for how the sausage gets made. So
yeah,
tell me,
do you have thoughts on the record or how the record found you? Or
I found this record. I was a fan of your music, and I had exhausted, I guess, poured through all the albums, and I think I came across and found out that you had released this, but I didn't. It was like after it had been out for a little bit, and I was like, oh, okay, I need to go check this out, and had a really hard time finding it on the internet at that time.
Yeah.
It was on is it Chinese, Japanese? What label?
A Japanese record label. So it never even like officially was distributed in America outside of like our website, I think. I mean, like, it might have been, I think they might have put it through Amazon, was pretty new at that point, I think. But
this is so dope to have all your lyrics in Japanese. Like, that's so cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I found it, and it took forever to get to me after I ordered it. But then I got it, and I think at the time, the reason that my CD is in such pristine shape is because at the time I would buy CDs, immediately make them into MP3s, put them on whatever device, and then, so I don't even know if this has been played more than once, but
yeah,
I like the CD itself, but the MP3s I've played a crap ton of. But yeah, I loved this album. I felt like you definitely seemed to like push the envelope of like, arrangements and production, compared to previous releases. And I really appreciated it. I really loved the sounds and the songs, and it's 2 different albums put together in one.
Yeah, it was like 2 different, I mean, the backing tracks for each of those 2 halves of the record were done in one day. So the second half of the album, the kind of lighter, more piano-based stuff, was recorded first, and that was just going to be the next album after New Old Friends. But basically, it was like the day that the CDs arrived, because we initially put out New Old Friends independently, and the day that the CDs had arrived from the manufacturer was the day I was in the studio recording what was called the Hell or High Water section, which is like track 10 through 19. Yeah. And so that was just going to be the next record. But then a couple months later, Made in Mexico Records was resurrected by Damien Jurado and a couple friends, and they wanted to put out New Old Friends. And I was like, okay, awesome. But I was like, I also have this other record that I'm almost done with. And if you guys would be able to do that, within like 6 months or something like that, after New Old Friends, sign me up. And Damien was super supportive. He like even wanted to cover the song Mother's Son from that section, and which would have been so rad. I mean, Damien was like a songwriting hero of mine and a friend. And so he had basically taken over Made in Mexico, which had started out as like the label that had put out Pedro the Lion and a bunch of different Northwest artists, like in the super early aughts, late 90s. so Damien kind of resurrected it and kind of made it an imprint of, he was on Secretly Canadian Records at that time. Mm-hmm. And so they basically, so we had all this sort of distro and in support of Secretly Canadian. And so it was great. But what happened was, as soon as New Old Friends finally got the re-release, which now was like November. So we had tracked Hell or High Water in February of 2004. And then they're going, well, you know, we're going to need you to tour this record. We're going to need you to, like, you know, support it. So why don't you just record a few more songs to tack on to Hell or High Water? And we can kind of, just to kind of like bide my time more, I guess, you know, like just keep me busy and stop bugging them about trying to get out this other record. And so at that point I was like, you know what? I'm just going to record a whole nother album, and it's going to be like the opposite of that record. And it's going to be, you know, the yin and the yang of Dolour. So I had all these, you know, gentle piano based songs with the Hell or High Water stuff. Then I was like, well, now let's go full on guitar. Like there was like 4 guitars, you know, and again, it was all tracked live in the studio in one day.
Yeah. Like Wake Up.
Yeah. So track 1 through 9 was the Storm and Stress stuff. Yeah. So okay. So you'll see like the loud section ends with an instrumental, and then the quieter section opens with an instrumental, because they were supposed to go in the opposite order. It was supposed to open with an instrumental and close with an instrumental, but the Japanese label in the end decided to start with the rockers, which, you know, makes sense. But
yeah,
but it's the opposite order of how they were tracked. So it's kind of a double album. It's kind of one concept split into two.
It's so interesting being someone that, as a listener, I mean, obviously I can see a break in this, and there's 2 different arcs and stuff. So like, I always wondered what that meant, you know, but now that you're saying this, that makes sense. But when I got this, in whatever year that was, you know, this says 2007 on this. Right. So probably it was around then, 2008, whatever. When I got this, like, I think that for me, it felt cohesive, you know, for some reason. It did. Cool. It did feel like you were, I guess I wondered maybe if you were like emptying your vaults, like this is what I got kind of thing, you know? But I don't know. I loved it. I loved everything about, I mean, An Easy Life, I've always been envious. I was like, that's a great song. I wish I had written that. Mother and Son is by far my favorite on this.
Cool.
I sang that song so many times. The melody, that's so beautiful. Yeah, it's great.
Well, that's cool. I mean, I never even thought about it kind of as one listening experience. But I mean, yeah, I guess the fact that it's all on one CD and then you rip it to MP3s, and however you're listening to it, you're probably not even thinking necessarily about sort of an A and B side to it or whatever. But
yeah, no, but I mean, I'm most definitely going to go listen to it when we get done, and like maybe even do it in the order you wanted it to be, and you know, like check it out and be like, and re-listen it with the new information, because that's just so interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, it was a response to you know, the first 3 Dolour albums were very like overdub heavy, kind of like put together in the studio albums. And so it was very much, and they just, you know, they all took a long time, but of course the irony being that Years in the Wilderness ended up taking the longest. And the other thing that nobody knows, because there was no real like promotion around it or whatever, was that none of the musicians had heard the songs before that day in the studio. So,
oh wow.
So I had like just made super simple chord charts. Like, I don't know how to write music. So I just was like, here's the chords to the song. And then I would play it for them like once, you know, on the piano. And then we would start doing takes. And so it was, you know, the idea was capturing spontaneity.
I love that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was very trusting. Looking back, I'm like, I can't believe how trusting I was, but I had a great group of musicians. So for the Hell or High Water stuff, it was me on piano, my buddy Josh Autumn on electric guitar, Paul Muma, who had played drums with Dolour on every record, but he only had played on a couple songs on New Old Friends and Suburbiac, but he played the whole first album. So it was great doing another full project with him. And then Phil Peterson, who's like an insane genius string arranger guy, who's gone on to do stuff with like St. Vincent and Taylor Swift and Lana Del Rey. And like he played upright bass and then overdubbed whatever horns and cellos and stuff on it. But awesome. So it was a killer group. And so it was like a 10-hour session And we actually recorded them all in the order that they're on the record. So
oh wow.
For both of the things. So it wasn't even necessarily supposed to be that order, but I just ended up liking the flow of them so much from just how we naturally did them that it worked out.
Did you take anything from let's say for, Lion, Hide, and Pride, and you did 3 versions of it. Did you ever take something that was in the first version because it was better? Or was it really this is all I love?
No, I think now that I remember, I think on Storm and Stress, there might've been a couple little bass fixes, and that's only because the guy that played bass on that was the guy that mixed it. So I think he wanted to fix a few of his little things, but for the most part, it was just, figuring out how to fade things in and out, like at the beginning and end of the song. So, and there was, a handful of overdubs and stuff, but those basic tracks, the meat and potatoes of the songs were all just done in 2 10-hour sessions. So,
so crazy. But the band for Storm and Stress was different than the band for Hell or High Water.
Yeah, it had the same, it had one of the same electric guitar players, but then I had, so it was me on electric guitar, Josh Autumn, who played on Hell or High Water as well, and then my buddy Charlie Larson. All 3 of us were playing electric guitar, and then Jason Holstrom on bass, and he's the one that ended up mixing the whole project with me. And then Johnny Rock, as they call him, on the drums. And so yeah, that was the live band. And then with both records, I added some little things here and there, but I mean the meat and potatoes of it was all.
Yeah.
So yeah, so then it was a process of over the next 2 years of trying to fit in time between touring from the old friends and then Made Mexico records going completely away. And then, I mean, just so many things got in the way. I actually started working on a whole nother album that I was calling The Royal We, which ended up being the songs that I went back to, and a computer completely crashed on me. And so I lost all those songs. And then, and that was kind of I just started to feel like there's a sign happening, Dolour is supposed to maybe this record is cursed or something, it just felt just one thing after another. And so it was do I want to go through the process of putting together another live band? Do I want to try to fight through either independently releasing or finding another indie label that's going to be a total mess? And then finally, by the time I'd already moved on and started the Traveling Mercies, that Japanese label, Kin's Records, which had put out a kind of best of collection called A Matter of Time a couple years before.
Yeah, seen that.
They reached out and they were just hey, do you have anything else? And I sent them the Traveling Mercies stuff and the Dolour record, and they were way more of a power pop, indie pop kind of label or whatever. So they were Dolour, we're doing it. So so I was okay, cool. At least that music will get out there in some form. Yeah. But by that point, I'd already put out a Traveling Mercies album, and I was just fully in that mode. And I tried to sneak in a couple Dolour songs into our sets, but it was 2 different worlds.
Yeah.
I couldn't, at least at that time, sort of find the common ground. I was just very into having a clean break, and so I feel with the Traveling Mercies, I was able to do what I was trying to do with the Years in the Wilderness, which was going to the studio, and we just tracked stuff live, vocals and everything, and had the record out a week later. And that was just so exciting to me after just years of this, it just seemed endless overdub situation, and not having my own studio. So I didn't really have control over people's schedules, or I feel I'm living now what I wish I could have been living then, as far as just recording stuff when I want, putting stuff out when I want, and just, having that control. Yeah. It was a major learning experience, but it was tough because what it's like when you put a record out that sort of encapsulates an era of your life or a chapter of your diary. But with this record, it just, because it just had so many different, ups and downs, that by the time it came out, it didn't seem like it was representing that period of time for me at all. And so it kind of never ended up having a place in my own sort of even memories of I forget about it sometimes,
In my opinion, it's a great album, and you should be very happy for it. And I, as a fan of your music, when it did find its way to me, I was beyond grateful, because I wore it out, listened like crazy, and certainly inspired me and pushed me to, work on my craft and be better and stuff too. But I understand. I mean, what your story is one of indie musician realizing the dreams. I mean, you sure you had like falls and stuff. It sucks that you had to wait so many years between recording this and seeing the light of day. But you learn from the recording experience. These songs do exist for people.
Right.
I'm sure there was some sort of relief of like, thank God this is now out of my closet and out of my brain, because I don't know. For me, it just aggravates me whenever I can't just see something through to fruition.
Yeah, I never like having unfinished stuff sitting around. So, I mean, that aspect of it was nice, but I'd also just never had such a dramatic shift in my creativity and like my outlook on and life and everything like that. So it really was like a reminder of a past life, So I don't even know if I even really had. I don't remember all that much relief, but looking back, I'm glad that it exists, and I'm glad that it happened, because there was like so many different like almost records throughout those early Dolour years, that just so much of it just got swallowed up by not having studio access or money or whatever, so the fact that it even made it out there at all really is like kind of a miracle.
I mean, yeah, if you and I could have been doing what we're doing now when we were 19, 20, 21, I would have so much more content out there, in some ways it's good that I didn't have that availability, but in some ways, I kind of regret that, or wish that I had that, because there's so many demos of songs where I'm like, oh man, that song was so good. I wish I had done something with that,
with like, me doing Royal We and even Origin Story. I do feel like I've kind of like made up for some of that like chaos of the early aughts. But
speaking of Origin, look at me.
That looks so good on vinyl.
Oh my gosh, it's very beautiful. It's mine's signed, by the way.
Ooh.
So you have one or two songs from?
I did one from each half of the record. So I did Naive and I did Lion Hiding Crying.
Right. Number 3 on side A and number 13, which I guess will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on side B.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like as a production concept, it really worked for some of the songs. I'm talking about Years in the Wilderness now, but like with them all kind of being forced into that thing of like being played by a band for the very first time, each song getting like an hour of time, and that's like it, that really worked for some of them. And I do love just like the sound of like, you can hear the room and all that stuff. But then there's always the other thought of like, oh, I wonder how that song would sound a little bit more, produced, or like, in an overdub in a more classic Dolour sense. And so it was fun to be able to take on Naive and Lion Hiding Crying that way.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what's so beautiful about songwriting, recording in general, is like, it really is a snapshot of where you are. And if you decide to do it this way, this is it kind of thing. And I mean, there's of my records that like I go back to and I'm like, oh, I wish I'd done that, or I wish I'd done this, or I wish those kind of things. But at the same time, I go listen to it and like, it's this album, that's what we did, and I think you have a beautiful record here, and I'm glad it exists.
I guess now that I've been able to come back to Dolour, I feel like I want to honor that album more than maybe I have over the years, like, I guess it never sat well with me that was like the last Dolour album, is sort of, to me, it was a little bit of a fractured record of trying to push out the walls that I had in my mind created around Dolour of, whether it was a guitar-based song or a piano-based song, it was like, let's go in the furthest extremes of that, but the intention was always to kind of like come back with like a clean pop sort of thing. And that's kind of what I was working on when that laptop had died, which was sort of like a red flag for me of like, maybe this is the end. And so I feel like now that I've been able to kind of do that with the Royal We and Televangelist and now the new singles and stuff, I feel like the Years in the Wilderness maybe makes more sense, at least to me, like in the order of events of sort of each record kind of having its own production approach. And it's less of just like out on its own as like this weird last record that,
Yeah. Well, it changed from being the last record to being the middle of your career.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that you've reclaimed your story, and I think that's what's so beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like I just hope now it can just be seen more as like kind of just part of that exploration of songwriting and production, and not any sort of end or whatever, you know. So
Right. How much, I guess, authority did you have over the artwork for this?
I actually I hired the artist, and she was a friend of my buddy Robin Pecknold, and she ended up doing artwork for Fleet Foxes a couple years later. But that stuff they did, the Japanese label.
These things.
I just worked on the cover.
Okay.
And my brother and I did that layout just for like the cover and that back panel, but the rest of it, the label, yeah, like that. I guess they took some of those little things from her artwork, but
okay.
Yeah. So I guess I sent them the lyrics and stuff, but I mean, they laid out like the disc and the Japanese versions of the lyrics and all that stuff. So hopefully the translations are decent. I don't know, but
it says art by Toby Leibowitz and Quince Records.
Okay, yeah, Toby. It was like literally like we met once. I was like, I love your style. She had that real kind of like, what's that guy? Henry Darger, that artist. His art was found like in his attic after he died, and it's like this real meticulous, crazy stuff. Really cool stuff. You should check him out. I think his name's Henry Darger, but I was super into his kind of vibe. So it was basically she gave me a bunch of pieces of art that we had to like sort of assemble and scan.
Oh, I love that.
And yeah, so it's all like, you know, tracing paper and like hand done, and then we kind of like scanned it in and sort of, you know,
oh, that's cool.
Laid it out. Yeah.
But on your Bandcamp, you have different artwork up. Is that correct?
I did have different artwork because, long story short, in like 2011, after I'd already moved to Nashville and everything, and years after Dolour was done, this digital distributor that I was working with at the time, like ended up like working some deal out with Napster, who was briefly trying to be like a competitor with like Apple Music, like trying to have like a legit thing. And so we did like an exclusive with Napster in 2011 where I released each album separately. And so that was maybe just like a year before that version of Napster completely collapsed. So I don't think you can find that anywhere now, but my brother and I did new artwork for it using photos from the sessions of the time. So at first I thought, oh, it'd be kind of fun to just keep, you know, allow that artwork to live on by putting them up separately on Bandcamp. But then just in the last 6 months, I'm like, you know what, like Years in the Wilderness is a thing, you know, like there's a reason, you know, Storm and Stress wouldn't have existed without Hell or High Water. And so they kind of, they're like, you know, fraternal twins that, you know, belong together. So, so I just put them back together as one album
nice.
on Bandcamp. Yeah.
Well, I love this story. I most definitely go back and listen to this again and like soak in all this new information and see how that affects the listen. But yeah,
I don't know if it's a good listen or not, but yeah, like starting with the mellow side, you know, that's the order they were, you know, written in and recorded in. So, you know, it might have a different thing. And just having like the bookends of instrumentals at the beginning and end instead of like two in the middle, you know.
Yeah.
Kind of weird, but
well, cool, man. Congrats. 15 years. That's awesome, man.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, buddy, thank you so much for taking the time. And
no problem. You need anything else, you let me know, man.
All right. Take care, buddy.
All right.
All right. Adios.